Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Door to Door. I'm Virginia Stanley, joined here with my colleague Chris Connolly. And today we have a really special author with us. Two authors, but we'll get to her in a second. We're thrilled to have with us today author Russell Banks. Russell, welcome to Door to Door. We're so thrilled to have you here.
Oh, thanks, Virginia. It's great to see you and great to be here.
Well, Russell, we met a long time ago when your book, The Sweet Hereafter, was celebrated as the Seattle Reads community-wide read, which was wonderful. We'll get to all that right in a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I let me do a brief introduction here, and let's get right into your book, Foregone, which is utterly compelling and wonderful. So, Russell, twice a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, past president of the International Parliament of Writers, a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Your books have been plenty, and they have been translated into 20 languages. You've received numerous prizes and awards, including the Commonwealth Award for Literature. We could be here all day just talking about your vast library of books that you have shared with us and graced us with, and you are really just so wonderful. Your new book, Foregone, which is out in March, is boy, you can't stop. We've talked about this already. You've had spoken with librarians between, I don't know, the last 6 months. You've spoken with librarians, and the fever pitch it has built to. The first novel in about 10 years, right, Russell?
Yeah, exactly 10 years. The last novel was Lost Memory of Skin, and then there was a book of stories, and then a nonfiction book of travel writings. And in the meantime, I was puttering away with this.
Well, boy, I loved Lost Memory of Skin. I loved all your books, The Sweet Hereafter, Rule of the Bone. I love your books. I'm such a huge fan, and I'm so thrilled to have you here.
Yeah.
So, Foregone is, we were talking before about what to say and what not to say. And so I'm going to ask you to share with our viewers what you want them to know about Foregone.
Right. Well, let's see. I can talk a minute or two, I think, about the process, which will lead me to talk about the structure of the book, which will lead me to talk about the characters and the themes of the book. I think it's unlike most of my books, which when I begin, I write straight through to the end, and it's about 3 years out of my life. And I don't work on anything else at the time. In this case, though, this is a book that I really, in a sense, began many years ago, probably 20 years ago, when I first started making notes about and doing a little research about the young American men who in the late 60s, early 70s fled from the United States to Canada to escape the military service during the Vietnam War. And there were 60,000 of them. And their lives fascinated me, perhaps partially because I'm Canadian American myself. 3 of my grandparents and my father are Canadians, and now I'm officially a Canadian citizen as well. And I think my family history and association with Canada made me look at it from both sides, those young men and their fates and their reasons for fleeing to Canada, and then their lives as they unfolded over the next 20, 30, 40 years, as it's now turned out 60 years or so. And I became fascinated by that evolution that began with flight from the United States. About the same time, the issue of refugees and immigration became very, very much an issue of the day. I mean, in the last couple of years, the last 4 years to be exact. And in some ways that heightened my engagement with this material that had kind of lain fallow, sitting in a drawer from years before. And so I pulled it out and realized that my man, who was young when he fled to Canada, would now be about 80 years old. and he'd very likely be in bad health, and he'd be facing the end of his life. And I wanted him. I wondered how his life would look to him from that vantage point. So, because like many of the Canadians Americans who became Canadians during this period, they assimilated thoroughly, and most of them did. Only 10% of them returned after Carter gave them, pardoned them. Most of them stayed there and became Canadians, and because they were relatively well educated, and they were able to rise into the middle and upper middle class, the professional classes. Some of them became even well known. So I made my man a well-known documentary filmmaker of the left, and I thought it might be interesting, finally, if I could set it up so that he's telling his story to a younger man who was his student at Concordia College in Montreal, Canada, years before. And his wife was present, his Canadian wife, and a producer and a cinematographer and a sound person, and alternate between his memories and the telling of his memories. Now, let me just add one more factor to this, because it's very important to the story and its structure. His experience, his memories, were very different from the way in which he's expressing it to the people who are filming him. This comes out of my experience with someone very close to me, in my family, in fact, who at the end of his life suffered from dementia and experienced something that's called confabulation, in which you mix together, but all of it believably to the person who's experiencing this. You mix together your memories, your fantasies, your wishes, your fears, your nightmares and dreams, and reality gets radically distorted in the experiencing of it, the reality of other people. Your own reality is quite concrete and specific in confabulation. I began to think about this experience, this very subjective experience. I thought, how could I set up a telling, a narrative, such that we could simultaneously experience what he is experiencing in his confabulated state, as he is elderly, dying, medicated, and so forth, and what is being filmed, what is being listened to by younger, more objectively grounded and realistically grounded in the moment people. So the structure of the book alternates between my main character, Leonard Fife's memories and his experiences as he holds them in his head, and the narrative that the filmmakers are actually capturing. It was a difficult book to figure out how to structure, and that may be why it took me so many years to finally come around to the actual writing it. Once I got rolling on it, then it was, I won't say easy, but it was it was much faster, and it was much closer to my usual 2 or 3 year kind of time frame for writing a novel. So that's a little background for it.
Well, it's such an interesting book to read, because memory is such an interesting thing. You and I had spoken, I don't know, last month, about memory, and especially among like close friends or family members. And when somebody tells a story and the other one says, that's not the way I remembered it at all, right? And
Right.
so I think that what's really interesting about this is that you don't really know what's going on. You don't know, because his wife keeps saying it's the medication because he's so ill.
Right.
Right. And
Yeah.
and you've got these his his students, these people who are now, in their own right, filmmakers, and they want their story. They have an agenda, and they want him to talk about X, and they've got their 25 questions all ready to roll.
Right.
And he's like, oh yeah, no, this is what we're going to do. And he's not going to do any of it unless his wife is there, which I find. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like he has to have his wife there. He's not going to do it without her. Some
Yeah.
of your lines I just typed and typed and I retyped because they were, I mean, just about what is truth, you know,
Mhm.
and that he really wasn't interested, I don't think, in telling this story to anybody except Emma.
Yeah, well, that's it. He wants her to know truly who he is and who he was, and not. He doesn't want to be someone who was constructed by other people's desires or needs or perceptions, and he's never really told her the truth of his life and who he really is. He's not really told it to himself. He's lived a life, I won't say of lies, but he's lived a life, as many of us do, that was constructed out of the immediate circumstances of his life as it unfolded in front of him. You know, you remind me, something that lurks way behind this book is that my mother in her 90s decided to write a book, and she her autobiography, and she titled it "My Autobiography as I Remember It." And my brothers and my sisters and I read it, of course, and we said, "That's not how I remember it." But she had the proviso in the front, in the title, and so this is Leonard Fife's autobiography as he remembers it, and it's not how everybody else might remember it, and it's not how they perceived him as he went along.
All right. I think too, sort of those characters that are they're not on the periphery. They're like his caregiver, you know, his nurse, his day nurse. You
Yeah,
know, you meet her right in the beginning, and she's, I mean, her goal really is to care for him and to, you know, take care of business.
right.
But I also think that it's interesting how she reminds him of somebody, and then you find out later it's all kind of tucked away back there. His whole history and I mean, you know, his journey, you know,
Mhm.
that's brought him to this place. I mean, it's just so powerful when he's really nearing the end of his life, and he's looking back and he's ready to just shed
Right,
this image, this, you know,
right,
glorification, this myth, this myth of who he might be.
right.
It
That
takes great
character,
pain.
the Renee, she's a Haitian nurse, and she's in a way the reality principle at the center of the story, and or she functions sort of like a Greek chorus, and you know, everything kind of checks against her reality, because her, in some sense, is the most reliable reality in the novel, I think. That's why, in a sense, it begins with her and it ends with her.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She's sort of like the rudder and
Yeah,
on the boat of this one. You know, it's really it's quite powerful, and um I I love his wife because, well, it's so hard to say. I don't want to say too much, but I love the wife because she's a constant. You know, she's sort of like, you know, what is your response to any of this? And it's like, I have to go, I have to leave for a little while and I'll be back. It's like, wait a minute, you know, like this thing. It's
yeah.
great.
And well, one thing I think you realize fairly early on is that she truly loves him, and he has been incapable in many ways of responding in a loving way to her clear, uncluttered love for him. And this is an attempt by him to return that love in some way before he's gone, and recognize and honor it. And so her presence in this story is very important, in the sense that she evokes from him from the very beginning his need and desire to be known, and that admission in a way is crucial to the nature of love. I mean, what generates it is this desire to be known, and the trust that someone is capable of knowing you. Making yourself available and known is a very difficult thing for us to do, and love of another human being is about the only way we can truly get away with it and do it, and safely, as it were. And so he's trying very hard to do that despite the odds and despite the difficulties. And his younger, the guy, McLeod, who's directing the film, there is he doesn't get it most of the time. He wants his movie, he wants his film. He's got a contract with CBC, and he's got some money to spend, and he's got a first-class cinematographer there, and he's running the show, or he wants to run the show. Mm-hmm. And Leo Fife keeps taking the show away from him and making it his show.
Yeah, well, it's his last shot to do it.
Yeah.
And as he says, if I don't do it now, and if she's not in the room when I tell it, then I'm not telling it, because I'm not telling it to you guys, because I don't really care if you're making a movie or not. It's great. It's just so good, so powerful, and I just, for all the stuff that he's kind of done and gone through, it takes guts to do what he's doing. He doesn't have to. He doesn't.
No, he can go out, being admired and loved and by the public, and be a celebrity, a semi-celebrity in Canada and in the world generally, admired artist and so forth. Or he can make this confession, and so the tension between the two is the moment of the telling, and his use of that moment is really what makes up the novel, and the difficulty of telling the truth about one's own life anyhow. Well, as my mother found out, with her story as she remembered it, the difficulty of the elusiveness of memory, and it's the creative nature of memory too, how it operates in a very creative way. At a certain point while I was working on the novel, I began to realize what he's experiencing is a lot like what I'm experiencing as the writer. It's very close to writing fiction, where you're taking your past, your personal past, your dreams, your memories, your fears, movies you may have seen, books you may have read, and you're assimilating and integrating them into a patterned narrative as a fiction writer, and he's doing exactly the same thing, but he's trying to tell the truth about his life. I in the writing of the novel was doing a lot of the same thing, but I was trying to tell the truth about his life, about someone else's life than my own.
Right. Well, he had a lot of control over, sort of keeping things the way that they were. And then if he just sort of lets it all go, you don't really have control over responses.
Right.
Yeah, there so much to talk about. You had agreed to read a couple of passages from the book, and so maybe this might be a good time to do that. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd love to. Actually, I thought a good idea might be just to read the last page or so of the first chapter. It doesn't give away too much, but it more or less gives you some of the context and the setup for it. This is after Fife's cameras are about to roll. He's situated and under the light, or the pin light over his head, and for a few seconds, everyone is silent, waiting for Malcolm's first question. Malcolm is the young director who's making this film. But suddenly Fife says that he's going to answer a question that no one knows how to ask today, or no one is rude enough to ask. It was asked of him many times long ago and over the years, asked privately and in public, and presumably answered truthfully and completely over and over. So to ask it yet again would either be stupid or insulting. And to ask it on this particular occasion would seem stupid or insulting, or both, when in fact it is neither. The question, he says, is simply this: why did you decide in the spring of 1968 to leave the United States and migrate to Canada? For nearly 50 years, he's been answering that question. creating and affirming the widespread belief, at least among Canadians, that Leonard Fife was one of the more than 60,000 young American men who fled to Canada in the late 1960s and early 1970s in order to avoid being sent by the US military to Vietnam. Those 60,000 men were either draft dodgers or deserters. For half a century, Leonard Fife was believed to be a draft dodger. It's what he claimed on the day he crossed the border from Vermont into Canada and asked for asylum. He's claimed it ever since that day. The truth, however, as always, is more complicated and ambiguous. Therefore, consider the preceding as merely a preface. For here begins Malcolm McLeod's controversial film, O Canada. Though brilliantly shot and edited by McLeod and produced by his wife Diana in the late Leonard Fife's own manner, it is in some ways a disheartening, disillusioning film about Fife, one of Canada's most celebrated and admired documentary filmmakers. Oh, Canada shocked and disappointed the millions of Canadians who admired Leonard Fife for being one of those 60,000 Americans who fled north in the late 1960s to escape being sent by the American government to kill or die in Vietnam. While his film Deathbed Confession may have been cathartic for Fife himself, it has brought many Canadians to question their past and present national policy of offering asylum to so-called refugees. Refugees are people who have fled their countries because of a well-founded fear of persecution if they return home. They are assumed to have seen or experienced many horrors. A refugee is different from an immigrant. An immigrant is a person who chooses to settle permanently in another country. Refugees are thought to have been forced to flee. Leonard Fife claimed to be a refugee. And then we go from there.
And take the journey, go on the ride.
Yeah.
Yeah, and find out all about him. Wow, it's I envy anyone who gets to read this for the first time, because you can't you just get to learn about this person and sort of what makes him tick and why he is the way he is, what he's capable of and what he thinks he's incapable of. And I just think it's so powerful. I think the book is so cinematic. I mean, it's
Do you
about
think so? Yeah. Well, I guess it's visible, it's visual. I don't know about cinematic. And I mean, I'm not, believe me, I don't want to correct you on that.
no. No, well, when he's flying over, when he's in the plane and he's flying over, and it's
Yeah.
like there's all these snippets, and they feel like flashes to me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's visual. It's yeah, which I think is sort of very much
You
tied.
know, I've always felt, Virginia, that if I can't see what I'm writing, then how can I expect a reader to see? So my first test when I'm writing a novel or a story or any work of fiction is to visualize what's happening, what I'm writing about. So it's very concrete and specific to me in visual terms, from page one to the end. And I think that it was Joseph Conrad said, he said, above all else, I want my reader to see. And he meant it literally. He didn't mean simply understand. He meant to see what's unfolding. And of course, you can't expect your reader to see unless you see yourself, you, the writer, see. And so I know that that's, for me, a real test as I work. Can I see it? Or when it starts to get obscured and I can't see it anymore, I usually read that as a problem in the writing, that I am having trouble imagining what it is I'm trying to put on the page. And I better go look at myself here and look at my relation to the content of the writing, because the problem is arising out of that. It's not arising out of my lack of talent or my lack of ability. It's arising out of my relation to the content.
Well, that's very interesting. Well, I mean, if if it's not true to you, and if you can't see it, yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. But I do think that I think it's as I say, it is a visual book.
Yeah. Thank you.
Of, give me
Well,
one.
you're probably right. I mean, it's funny about whether something is cinematic or not cinematic, can be adapted to a film or not adapted. You know, I remember going back to the 1990s when Adam Agoyan first called me about adapting The Sweet Hereafter,
Mhm.
or Paul Schrader called me about the same time wanting to adapt Affliction. I thought those two books are the least cinematic books I can imagine. I mean, one is told in 4 parts from 4 different characters' points of view, The Sweet Hereafter, and the other one is told from the point of view of a minor character who is not a player in it, and about a, one would think, a relatively unsympathetic character.
Right.
Uh, they're not cinematic books in the slightest, and yet, of course, they ended up being made into rather good films and rather successful films. So who can tell, you know?
Well, let's wait to see when this one gets made, and then we'll have this conversation again,
Okay.
Mr. Banks. But I loved Adam McGoyan's. I loved The Sweet Hereafter, the book and the film, and so many times, you can't. Many people don't like one or the other, and that's one of the handful of times, The Sweet Hereafter, that I thought, boy, this really delivers.
You know, I checked in with Adam Goya, and we became friends during the making of that film, and I've stayed friends over the years since. And I did, because I gave him a little thank you at the end of the book and the notes at the end, because I really wanted to get the filmmaking right, the details right on it, as well as make sure the Canadian details were correct. And Adam very generously read the text at an early stage, and offered to make a few changes and suggestions
Right.
to nail down the details. As I've never made a film myself, so I needed his help. He was very generous.
Yeah, that's such a heartbreaker, that story. Well, I want to bring Nancy in. Before I do that, I just want to read powerful. We've got quotes from Ann Beatty and Colin McCann, just raves about this book. And this new endorsement by Marilyn Robinson is just beautiful, and I'd like to read it, and then we'll continue our conversation. Foregone is a subtle meditation on a life composed of half-forgotten impulses and their endless consequences, misapprehensions of others that are accepted and exploited almost passively, a minor heroism that is only enhanced by demurral. In the rages of a sick old man, profound questions arise. What is a life, a self? And what is lost when truth destroys the fabrications that sustain other lives? Ah, Marilyn Robinson,
God,
beautiful.
I was so grateful to her for that, because she doesn't make those kinds of comments very easily or often. She's a very private person, and I was just so touched and grateful to her.
Well, books like Foregone aren't written very often, so there.
Okay.
Now I'd like to bring in a good old friend of all of ours, and one near and dear to you and to HarperCollins, Nancy Pearl, everyone's favorite librarian and author and wonderful person. Is she there? Where is she?
I'm
Yes.
here.
There she is. Hello, Nancy.
Hi.
Hello. Hello. Hi, Russell.
Hi, Nancy.
So nice to see you again.
Yes, and you too.
I was going to say, as an interviewer, I have so many questions based on your talk with Virginia, but
Oh,
we can.
All right. Well, I'm going to turn it over to you, but I want to just a couple of things, Nancy. Your book that you wrote with HarperCollins, The Writer's Library, which came out in September, is a wonderful collection of interviews that you did with authors, and you went to everybody's home and sat and with Jeff Schwager and spoke with them and learned about them and looked at their books, the books that informed them as people, that resulted in their becoming such wonderful writers. And one of those people, in fact, was Russell Banks. And so I love the conversation. I love the interview that you all did together, because that was a really, Russell, you were too smart for your own good when you were a kid, and your teacher was making you do that crazy school project all year long in the hallway or something.
Yeah.
But you guys could talk about
It was
that.
basically to get me out of the classroom. And
Well, you know, if a
keep
kid
me
is too
busy,
smart,
yeah.
he's bored, and then it's just like you're going to be trouble. But Nancy, your book was widely reviewed, starred reviews, PW, and a library reads selection, and with good reason. It's just, you really learn so much, and you learn so much about. I was just having a conversation with a librarian from Hawaii the other day, and we were talking about your book and how, because of that, her reading list grew, as did mine, and ordering books like crazy from authors that I've either heard of and never read, or just was like, who is that? So Laurie Moore at the top of my list over there. So anyway, it's a wonderful book, and you all have this great history, because the very first community-wide read was created by none other than Nancy Pearl, and it was
With a lot of help.
with a lot of help. But I think it was a Lila Wallace Reader's Digest bound,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Nancy?
Yep.
And Chris Higashi. I mean, it was a huge undertaking, and the idea was for all of the community to read one book. And boy, that was fantastic. And that was, the selection was Russell Banks's book, The Sweet Hereafter. And I was very privileged and honored to actually be there for that, going out to Seattle and watching this magic unfold. And now this has been replicated in cities and countries all over the world. So I'm going to sit back now, Nancy, and let you take it from there. Maybe you could talk a little bit about FOREGONE, because that is of the utmost, that is at the top of our list right now, is talking about FOREGONE. But I'm going to sit back and let two friends talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Thanks.
Well, you know, Russell, when we were choosing the very first If All Seattle Read the Same Book, which thankfully the title has now become Seattle Reads, much less clunky, it was a no-brainer for me, because yours was the book that I wanted the community to read and to come together to discuss. Because I think that what all your books, all your novels have done is talk about the human experience, the shared human experience that is at that layer below going out shopping to Safeway. Oh, you don't have a Safeway in your town. Oh, we're so different. You know, that kind of thing. I mean, it's the shared human experience. And it just seems to me, I mean, that although The Sweet Hereafter is so perfect, because you can talk about you as a writer and why you chose to tell the story in that way from 4 different viewpoints. All your novels, well, all that you write, the fiction that you write, is so character driven that you leave the books feeling like you know as much about those characters as you could possibly know from what you've said, but you're so curious about what happens next. And in all of those discussions that you were so nice to do in Seattle, the first question I remember that everyone asked in all of those different discussions was, well, what happened to Billy Ansell after that last page was turned? And I remember you said, I don't know. And do you know?
You really don't, unless they die over the course of the telling. Then the question gets reversed. You want to know what happened to him before the novel started.
Right.
And the pages before that were unwritten. And I guess that's a testament to the believability of the characters. Their human reality comes over the reader, and then the reader wants to link up his or her own timeline with the character's timeline.
Right.
It's interesting. There were only 2 characters in my books that I have ever thought of returning to and finding out for myself whatever happened to them, answering the question for myself. One is in that book, and it's the 14-year-old, oh, she's 15-year-old girl,
Right.
who is she's a paraplegic as a result of the accident, and she's a central moral spring in the story too. She's the one who forces other people to confront reality and the truth in the story. And the other is Bone in Rule of the Bone, another 14-year-old or adolescent, homeless boy, drug-addled and so forth. And we spend a year of his life with him. I always wanted to return to both those characters, I think because they were adolescent and they were still unformed in some important way. And I, in a sense, therefore, didn't really know them the way I know adult characters, because they are formed, and no matter how you try to change them, that's one of the interesting things about fiction. It's very difficult to do. People don't change much, or very easily, for sure. But adolescents do become somebody else, and I always wanted to know whatever happened to her, and also whatever happened to Bone, and would love to revisit them someday, and as adults, I mean, it would be really fascinating for me to see what kind of adults they came out.
Well, I think a lot of your readers hope that you do go back to them, even in a short story.
Well, that might be how I would have to do it.
Yeah, right. When we interviewed you for the Sweet Hereafter, I wish, when we interviewed you for the Writers Library, and we spent that afternoon with you, of course, we talked about what you were reading, what you had read, the role of books in your life, but you talked about reading Tolstoy and especially his novel, his novella, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. Yeah. And when I read FOREGONE, I said, oh yeah, that's the book that you were talking about, that you were thinking about or working on or whatever.
Right. No, it's true. I hadn't at that time, when you were here and we spoke. I was working on FOREGONE, and it didn't have a title yet, and I didn't have a title until it was completely done, actually, and I was indeed reading for about the third or fourth time in my life, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which is a book I've always admired and felt drawn back to, because I always felt, well, maybe I didn't completely understand it. It's a very profound book, morally and spiritually. And so I was reading it, and it obviously was guiding me. I think obvious to you now that you've read both in quick succession, and obvious to me at the time that this was the ghost in the works, the ghost in the book. I have a theory that almost every novel has a ghostly presence of another text in it. Palimpsest is something that's there, and that the writer is often not even aware of it. We're often unconscious of its presence, but it's a book we read and maybe didn't quite get, that remained mysterious to us, but still in some profound way moving to us. And in this case, The Death of Ivan Ilyich is indeed the ghost in FOREGONE. It raises questions, and that I find they're universal in many ways, but also I find mysterious and require enormous attention and honesty to deal with. And the main one being, of course, how do we face death, and how do we deal with its inescapability? Once we realize it is inescapable, and most of the time one doesn't until the very end of life. And so its structure and format and the themes of Foregone are very much drawn from the Tolstoy novella.
Have you ever tried to identify the ghost books behind any of your other novels? Memory of
Yeah, I have. I mean, it's an interesting. I mean, it usually doesn't occur to me until I'm halfway through the book, the writing in a way. For instance, Lost Memory of Skin. I was halfway through it, and I was writing about a man who happened to be 22, but he really emotionally and intellectually was much younger. So an adolescent who was living on an island, and he was befriended by an older, slightly threatening, but attractive figure. It was in the tropics, and there was talk of pirates, and there were talk of buried treasure and so forth. And I began to realize, wait a minute, there's something this is reminding me of. And of course it was Treasure Island. But I didn't realize that I was halfway through. But once I realized it, then I could kind of use that shadowy presence of Treasure Island to help guide me in the writing of the second half of the book, to structure it and to realize what I was really writing about. I was writing about a lot of the same things Stevenson was writing about in Treasure Island. The same thing happened with Rule of the Bone. I mean, I got halfway through that, and I said, gee, I got this adolescent boy who's sort of drug-addled and abused, and he's taken up and he's being accompanied in his travels by an older black man, and there's a bell ringing here somewhere. You don't have to invent the wheel here, Russell.
Heading out for the territory,
exactly. Right? And so that helped me then organize, and it's episodically structured and so forth.
Right.
And that helped guide me in the writing.
One of the things that you talked about in your interview just with Virginia was how Renee, the Haitian caregiver, is the moral center of the book. The kind of still says, oh gosh, I can't think of the poet who talks about the still center.
Right.
And then the young girl in The Sweet Hereafter is the same thing. Do you think that that's important to you, to have that moral center? Could you talk about why?
I think the moral point of view, there has to be one, it seems, at least for me. There has to be some way to register the crimes and misdemeanors of the other characters. And I can't just judge them from outside, from an authorial point of view. I mean, one of the things that's most important to me as a writer is to avoid judgment and to avoid sentimentality. And I can't do that unless I have a moral perspective somewhere in the text, within the story itself, that's not necessarily my own. Because I refuse to judge. I refuse to judge Leonard Fife or any of the other characters either. But she's able to judge them, and she judges them. Especially toward the end. You get it. You say, oh, she both approves and disapproves, and to what degree does she approve and disapprove of these people? And then she anchors it morally, anchors the story, and I think that's, for me, that's useful and necessary in the telling. I think it's useful to the reader too. The reader needs to know in some way, wait a minute, now how do I look at these people who are flawed and like the rest of us who are doing good and mostly bad things. How do I judge them? And well, I look at them from the point of view of Renee, this woman who's present, but not one of them. And it's very useful in the telling to have her there. And she also, just to go back to the theme of refugee versus immigrant, she's a refugee. She's fled from Haiti to be there. And her story, we know without her necessarily telling it, is radically different from Leonard Fife's story.
Right.
And that difference in some ways is what gives her the moral perspective that she carries to these white people who are affluent, artistic, et cetera types.
Do you think that all great fiction needs to have a moral center? Because otherwise it would be nihilistic. I mean, what would be the...
Yeah, I mean, that's something I think, Henry James expressed that. It's something that keeps on coming forward with every great writer. At some point they recognize that need, that necessity. And I think with every great reader, I mean, we feel that way with I look at it from the point of view of the reader first, I guess. It's necessary for me as a reader. And then therefore, I feel it's necessary for me as a writer. You know, most of what my instruction as a writer comes from is examination of myself as a reader. That's my primary grad school instruction. I never did go to graduate school. The first writing workshop I was ever in, I had to teach. I had never been in one before. And so I had to teach myself how to be a writer, which is the old-fashioned way, I guess. And the way I did it, and the way I continue to do it, even at age 80, is to keep my eye on what my experience as a reader is like, and keep being as conscious as I can of what is occurring when I read. It's like what I was saying about visualization. When I'm a reader, the books that I carry away with me in memory and return to in memory again and again are the ones that I was able to see somehow. I might forget the names of the characters and forget the twists of the plot, but I don't forget what I've seen. And that stays with me as a reader.
Right.
So as a writer, I want to be sure that I can see too while I'm writing. Same kind of process, I think.
So in all your books, you have been able to imagine characters who are not yourself. And that's the job of a writer, right? I mean,
well, it is for me, yes.
Yeah.
There are others who look at it.
Yeah, who would disagree, right? Okay, well, let's do your experience. So my question is, would you have, and you're so good at that. I mean, Bone, you know, or Dolores, the bus driver in The Sweet Hereafter. But would this have been a book that Foregone, would Foregone have been a novel that you could have written 40 years ago?
Oh, that's an important question for me, Nancy, because the truth is, no, I could not have written it when I was younger. For various reasons, but the most obvious being that I'm now in my late 70s, and in these years, one cannot help but face one's mortality. It stares you right in the face. I mean, I've been very fortunate. I'm healthy and vital in many ways, most of the important ways, and so on. But yet, I can count. And I know what it means to be 80 and on the actuarial tables. And so I couldn't have had I wouldn't have had the necessity of facing my own mortality. I would have had to work harder to get to that point and that understanding. And the terror of it, and yet the as I say, inescapability of it, and the need to face it down and accept it, and understand it, and see how it defines the meaning of a life. Is that, you know, those closing moments. So yeah, I couldn't have done this. And also, you know, another thing is, I mentioned the person in my life, my family, who had dementia late in his life and was confabulating and so on, and which drew my attention to that whole phenomenon of confabulation. but I have had many friends in the last decade, but most at an accelerating rate in the last 5 years, the last 3 years, die, sicken and die, and that has forced me to look more closely at my own mortality, and forced me to think more deeply about it, and attempt to write about it. I don't think those things were happening to me when I was young, and I don't think my attention was drawn with the same force and the same obsessive
Right.
nature as it is now.
Right. It didn't have the meaning then that it has now.
Not to me. I mean, I was too distracted by my own sense of immortality, I suppose.
Yeah. When I'm really interested in the kind of trickiness of memory and how Leo's memories, like your mother's memories, you know, were so far removed from what other people knew of him. Why do you think Leo was so, you know, there are things that we always try to keep hidden, right? I mean, we, you know, can't imagine sharing with anybody, even the people that we love the most. But what drove Leo to this compulsion to reveal to Emma, his wife of 40 years, the truth about himself?
Well, I think he has gradually come to realize that, in fact, he had abandoned all previous opportunities to return the love that was offered him by different people, starting when he was very young, even starting with his poor benighted parents, and coming forward. That for one reason or the other, he had never allowed himself to be known, truly known and loved. And he's reached the end game, and he's facing a woman who he knows loves him, but he has not allowed himself to love her back. And the only way he can do that is to trust her to enough to tell her the truth about himself. You know, there are witnesses along the way to each of the episodes that he reveals, in which he reveals something about himself and in his past. And each of those individuals, there's the artist friend that he stays with, there's the guy that he knew as a teenage boy who ran off with, and he meets up with 10 years later. There's the first wife, the second wife, and so on. Along the way, each of those people know a piece of it, but nobody knows the whole story. Nobody knows, except him, how those pieces are linked. And he's denied the linkage most of his life, and which is what I think we all do in to varying degrees. You know, we know the truth of individual episodes, and we can't avoid it because there were witnesses. But there's no one who has witnessed the whole of it, the whole story,
Except yourself.
Except yourself.
Right.
And so that's what he's trying to present to Emma. As a way of allowing himself finally to love her. That's what we have to do. You know, it's funny about, you think about love between two people who come together. The first thing they start to do is to try, once they feel they've successfully seduced this person, they try to tell their story. Right. They try to link up the various discrete pieces of their life. Because you want this person to witness your whole life story, because you realize as you're going that you cannot love that person back if you don't trust them enough to tell them the whole story. And that's the act of love is really an act of trust, and narrative trust, maybe we can call it. So he's doing that in order to finally love someone, having failed at it most of his life.
Well, Russell, I'm going to turn this back to Virginia, but I just want to say it's a wonderful, wonderful novel. And, your interview. You're always talking to you is such a treat.
Well, thank you. It's the same back to you for me. I love being with you in person and virtually. So
yes,
so
yes.
glad we could do this. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's hope we can be in person another time in our lifetimes.
We will. We will.
Good. Okay, Virginia, over to you, kiddo.
Nancy, thank you. And thank you for all those questions. I'm glad I wrote them down and sent them all to you so you could ask. Oh, I wonder if she's going to ask that question about Tolstoy. Oh, you are amazing, and I love you. I love you both. I don't know where else to go with this. I mean, I have so many different sentences that I've just highlighted and written, but honestly, the joy of this is in the reading. It's Russell Banks. What more do I need to say to you? It's when we were talking about affliction too, but the other amazing, powerful book that was also made into a movie that was with Nick Nolte, and that was really powerful too. But this is tricky, and this is memory is a funny thing. And this man has managed to keep it all sort of in these little compartments until the end. There was one sentence that I had written down, and you said the time like he's dying from cancer. He says time like cancers that devours our lives, and time is. And then when you're asking like, what is it? What is making him do this? TikTok. It's happening.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is that for all of us, TikTok, it's happening.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, but we can put it off because we're not, Chris can put it off farther than like I can, or Russell can, or you can, Virginia. Do you know what I mean? We're just, we put that knowledge out of our head as much as we can, don't we?
Yeah, well, but we're constantly being drawn back to it because it's
right.
the universal human experience. And,
right.
And A, it's inescapable eventually, but B, it's available to us early on and to everyone. Everyone faces it.
Yeah.
We tend to try to think of it in terms of numbers. I see every evening on the evening news the new numbers on COVID and the new deaths, the new cases, etc., new hospitalizations, and their numbers. And one of the ways in which it's made real to me, even though it's altered my life dramatically, is the individual stories that are told. I mean, PBS is doing a really good job at that. I've noticed the other networks are following suit by individualizing the people, making them human and known to us, and telling a little bit about their life. And that's what a novelist does, a storyteller does, is make concrete and specific, what would otherwise just be abstract and general and not therefore known.
Well, yeah, it's. I think you're right. I mean, there's no time like the present, as we have seen, and some of us are, we're all seeing those numbers, and some of us know folks, sadly, who have passed, and and others who are left with open arms, empty arms, and so. Yes, no time like the present, because it's not all linear. So there you go. I have a couple of questions from some librarian pals. Would you mind sticking around to answer a few?
I'd be delighted to.
All right then. Let's see. We have lots of librarians here watching. Rocco Stano from New York State. He says, I'm happy to say that Russell Banks is a member of the New York State Writers Hall of Fame, a program of the Empire State Center for the Book. Nancy, Rocco. We have Lillian Dabney. We have Janet Lockhart. We have folks from all over. Let's see. We have, memory is a funny thing. Maureen Roberts from Baltimore County. Have you ever considered writing your autobiography? And if so, what would the title be?
Yeah, my autobiography, as I remember it, the title, my mother used it already. I actually haven't considered it. I did write a memoiristic series of essays that I published as Voyager, that were travel writings. I called it Voyager travel writings, and I wove into the travel accounts personal experiences and realities and details of my own life, but to as a way really of being other than usual travel writing, but as something a little more personal and maybe more interesting to me as a writer, and maybe to the reader as well. But my own life has never really interested me as a subject for writing. It's my life to me is in many ways boring, and in most ways I think it's not been dramatic. It's been very fortunate, lucky, but not all that dramatic. And so I don't think I would ever want to write an autobiography. I'll leave that to other people to hold it to account.
But you could have that cooking show we've talked about.
That's entertainment, yes. No, what she's referring to is one of my dearest, longest term friends is also my editor, Daniel Halpern, and he's been staying with us over the course of this period of quarantine, self-quarantine. He's in our pod, and Dan and I like to cook together, and my wife and other family members think it's very amusing that these two old guys like to stand around in the kitchen and talk and gossip and sip wine and cook together. And so they've started videotaping it, and it's they want to make a show called Kitchen Codgers, and using a K, Kitchen Codgers, I think. And so they're saving these video clips, I think, to try to put it together and pitch it to the network.
I would watch that. I think
you would watch that.
Of course I would. Are you kidding?
Yeah, actually, well, it's kind of funny, and it gets funnier as the evening goes on.
Your friend Catherine Phoenix, you remember Catherine? She says, "I love how the geography is described. I lived in southern New Hampshire, Hanover, and Stowe, Vermont, and was a film student in Concordia." She says, "I never knew exactly where the mountains were, which rivers I was near, and how the road proceeded. That was the visual for me, the actual geography. That was one drive from Boston was epic." Nora Rawlinson, founder of Early Word, she says, "I love what you just said about the need to be able to see what you write. Great advice." Susan Riley is saying hello to Nancy. Maxine Bleiweiss from Westport. Hi, Nancy. And,
my assistant, Nancy, I think.
Let's see. Lillian Dabney, how did you come up with the title for Foregone? Where did Foregone come from?
Yes, we wrestled with the title. I say we because Dan Halpern and I and anyone else I did consult a lot of friends on the title. I had several different titles that I was playing with, none of which were satisfactory. And so I was struggling to find a title. And this was after the book was finished, and going back and rereading the text. In fact, the contract for the book, after it was taken at Echo, is for a book called Untitled, and and I was kind of actually for a while there, a few days, I thought maybe we can call it Untitled, but but then on rereading it, and you'll get to it if you read the book through. Towards the very end, and I think it's in the next to the last chapter. The word appears, and it appears in a very specific context, and I think that will tell you why it's called Foregone. It's a strange and interesting word when you think about it. We usually use it only in the phrase foregone conclusions, but it has an etymological history that I like. It's an old word, old English word, and it has a lot of resonance for me. and I think it has. It's not necessarily a key to the book, but it certainly is a key to the book. And I like the sound of it too, and I like the way it looks in type. These are all questions of title that are worth considering. I think. How does it sound to the ear? Foregone. It sounds like something that Edgar Allan Poe's Raven would say. Foregone. But I like the sound of it, and I like the way it looks in type.
Yeah, and I love the jacket. Chris, can you show the jacket one more time? I just think that's very, when they put that up there, it's quite arresting, I think.
Good, I like it too.
You do. Yeah, we talked about this, and it's
Yeah. Well, cars play a role. Motor vehicles play a role throughout. I mean, they alternate different going all the way back to the 50s and coming forward to the 60s and 70s, and they take on a certain emotional and imagistic meaning, valence, I guess, in the novel as well, both to Leonard Fyfe himself in the end, and also in the text to the reader too. So I was glad to see one of those. They had several different pictures they were trying, cars they were trying with it. I like that one, sort of off the road. It went off the road.
Right. Yeah. Well, they definitely do take. They play a part in the journey.
Yeah, definitely.
So, well, listen, we could go on for forever, but honestly, folks, so many people have read the book and told us how much they've loved it. There's an e-galley here, and you can click on that and librarians start reading. Don't forget that the book is going on sale in March. So February 1st is the deadline for Library Reads voting. Russell, thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure is all ours in speaking with you and in reading your words, and just being in your presence. You are a wonderful writer and a wonderful human being. And Nancy,
thank you, Virginia.
Well, I mean it. You've really you've taken us along on some wild rides. Just listening to you talk about Rule of the Bone makes me want to go back now and read that again. God, so good. Nancy Pearl, thank you. Writers Library went on sale in September and is going gangbusters. But if you wanted to get carried away and to these wonderful interviews and these insights into the lives of these writers and what shaped them as writers and what informed them, so beautiful, and each one just so interesting and unique. That's the Writers Library. I thank you so much for taking part in this interview today, Nancy. Listening to the two of you talk to each other is bliss.
I thank you, Nancy, too. I really enjoy talking to you whenever we have
good. Well, thank you for having me on, Virginia.
Always. Are you kidding? So be well, everyone.
All right.
Okay.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you next time.